And we're back.
Here we are.
Hello.
We're back. It's Sunday. What's
It
happening?
is Sunday. It's not Wednesday, which is the normal day that we do this, but it's a Sunday night special,
Yeah, that's
as
right.
I like
Here we
as I
are.
like to say. So welcome, listeners, to the Luke Deckard Show. Tonight, I'm really happy because we have Derek B. Miller with us tonight. Derek is a crime writer, and well, he's a writer in general, but he's written some really great crime books. And obviously, we have Phil as well with us. So before we kick in, Derek, tell us a little bit about yourself.
That's always the hardest question because
Isn't it?
you sort of want to say enough about me,
Right?
right? I'm what? I'm a writer. I'm an American writer. I worked in international affairs for a very long time. I'm from Boston, Massachusetts. I'm currently in Barcelona, Spain. Actually, I'm Sitges, which is further south. And I was in scholar of international relations for a while. I did my doctorate in Geneva, and then I worked at the UN for about a decade on international peace and security at the UN Institute for Disarmament Research. And during all that time, I was writing fiction. And then around 40 years old, I had decided that I didn't want any of the jobs above me. and so I figure if you don't like the view at the top of the ladder you're on, you should get off the ladder. Assuming the fall isn't too great, and that's the nature of the risk. So when Norwegian By Night came out, my first novel, I was delighted. It was very nice, but I'm not going to quit my day job. So then The Girl in Green came out, and I thought, well, maybe. And then by the time when the third one was picked up, American by Day, and some wonderful writers from Val McDermott to Richard Russo, started getting in touch and saying they loved the material. And I thought, you know what? Either I'm going to do this or I'm not going to do this. Yeah. But it's not the sort of thing that you can, at that level or at this level, you can't just sort of, no matter how talented one might be, with a handful of exceptions, you really can't do this stuff on your knee on the way to class anymore. I mean, it's not, you've got to say to yourself, no, I'm going to commit to this. I'm going to figure out how this works, figure out what I'm doing. And I know that sounds odd that after 3 novels, you reach that point, but there's a moment where you have to decide what you want to be when you grow up. And my journey to figuring that out was figuring out what I didn't want to be. And I'm like, no, thanks. Thanks, but no thanks. So after having tried a lot of stuff, I realized that, and also it's an easy thing to explain to your parents at this point. What do you do? I'm a writer.
Right.
Perfect.
Okay.
Yep.
It has a name. I can tell that's good.
No, carry on.
No, I was just going to make a following bad joke, which is that when you get to the border patrol and they say, what do you do? Before it's like, well, do a little of this, a little of that,
Yeah.
Now you got an answer,
Yep. No, I actually really relate to that because, my journey is kind of similar, with writing. I have a couple of very small books out there with a very, very small press. And it was similar. I was kind of jumping from job to job, not really enjoying those particular things, and that's eventually kind of bit the bullet and made a complete 180 change from what I was doing. Jobs that were unsatisfying, and chase the dream, I suppose. And I'm fortunate that I'm not making loads off of books, but it's great to be working in podcasting and writing scripts for Noiser podcasts. Little shout out as I do every week. But it's cool. But it is there is a certain moment. But I do really get that sort of you're going from job to job, realizing all the things you don't want to do before you find the thing that you actually do want to do. And that is storytelling. Storytelling has always been a really important part of my life. I don't know. I'm assuming the same is for you, Derek. An open question.
Yeah, I mean, the obvious answers say yes, of course, sure it is, but I think it took me a while to figure out why it is I was doing what I was doing. It wasn't necessarily because I want to sit in front of a campfire and command everyone's attention with, and regale them with these marvelous stories of, feats of daring do. It was more that I found that writing was, on a very personal level, a means of synthesizing, to bringing together, to create some coherence out of what is essentially unconnected in the world until it passes through us, right? And so it's and to give form to that felt satisfying. Plus, it was fun. It's also kind of performance, right? I mean, you sit. I mean, granted, I'm the only one in the room when I'm telling the joke, but I think it's hilarious. And and so there's the act of creation, the act of synthesis, and then feeling, and it took some time, but feeling an honest sense of connection to the experience of being a writer, and that has come much more over time, mainly because even going back to people like Euripides, when you learn a little bit about what their life and what they did and how people responded to their work and the kind of aspirations they had for it, but the kind of responses they got and the kinds of challenges they chose to take on, all of which I'm happy to discuss. But the larger point is that they reach certain problematics and challenges in their own lives. And once you've got some miles under your belt, to mix my metaphors, you start saying, oh, well, I've had those too. It's not pretension. It's not aspiration. It's not posing. It's a fact, You had that problem, I had that problem. You had that challenge, I had that problem. I'm now connected in a very profound and yet simple way with people who also do this. And I think that's very common for people who also do other things in life, right? At some point, you're not just wondering whether you are that, you are that. That's, like, I mean, if you ski or you do sports or something, at some point you're like, yeah, I'm a writer, I'm a guitarist, I'm a skier, whatever the case may be. And you're not worrying about it anymore. You're just in it. And so I don't know if storytelling, which is a bit of a grand term for me a bit, and I know it's used a lot now, but I'm still a little hesitant, I don't know what it means. I know what I'm doing and I know why I'm doing it, but I'm not sure when other people use that term if we necessarily mean the same thing. So sometimes I think people there's other words, right? Are they preaching? Are they being evangelical? Evangelizing, I guess is the verb. There's a lot of other terms for talking out loud, and you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's a bit of a long answer to a simple question, but it's kind of a complicated question.
No, it is a complicated question, because you can take it all of those different avenues, and I think from my perspective, I suppose it's looking at fictional narratives have always had an important role in my life, more than just sort of more than say the preacher preaching or something along those lines. I grew up reading and being told a lot of stories. C.S. Lewis was a really big influence on me as a kid. Tolkien, Sherlock Holmes, all that kind of stuff was kind of always there and always finding its way into the forefront of my life. Watching Star Trek or Star Wars, or there was all this kind of these kind of pop culture stories that were landing in front of me. I was connecting with them and found myself quite enraptured by them and being put into these worlds. And it was weird. I mean, for me, it was for the longest time, I didn't realize that I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to tell stories, but eventually when I did, and I kind of look back in hindsight and look at all this kind of stuff that was there and inspiring me, it's like, oh, that actually makes a lot of sense. And
Right.
it's actually sort of ridiculous that I didn't come to this conclusion much sooner in life, considering certain things that I'd done. I mean, Phil and I, way back in 2007 and 8, were goofing around and writing hypothetical Pirates of the Caribbean 4 films, and stuff like that. So it's so for me, it's always been kind of about those particular fictional narratives and what you can do with them and what you can convey with them. Have always been a really important part of my life, which I think brings us probably to the first question of tonight. Kind of speaking on this thread, I said I grew up watching things like Star Trek, so I was always, I mean, probably maybe similar for you guys, but I don't want to speak for you. But like, I always found myself drawn to, to the heroes of the story, to the Captain Kirks, to the, the RoboCops, the Luke Skywalkers, the Wolverine, those kind of, are those heroes, Superman, people that are either sort of, aspirational, or, they're ones that are more like, Spider-Man, where they are, you're kind of learning from their mistakes and learning to be heroic along the way. And I love that kind of stuff. So I guess the first question I have tonight is what do you guys think the function of storytelling is within society? And I ask that because I feel as if over the last, 10, 20 years or so, the role and function of storytelling, I think, might be, it's maybe not holding as much power or as weight as it maybe once held, possibly. But what do you guys think the function of that is within society?
Why don't you go first, Phil?
It's that I'm just kind of thinking. It's because for me, storytelling has always been one of the biggest things in which I discover new ideas, new ways to live your life, and it's just been just an overbearing and very just massive thing in my life, And much like Luke, then I was able to just be able to be engrossed in all these different wonderful tales and legends and mythology, and just be able to just have the freedom to explore that when I was a kid. And as I reached the very old age of 10, I was just like, I want to make films because that encompasses so many things that I love doing, drawing, and and just being able to live in those worlds. When you make films, it just becomes that kind of that just gives you that connection to all those fictional and possibly even non-fictional universes that you can just explore and just have a lens to see through. And so for me, like, storytelling has always been like a very big, in fact probably just like the biggest thing in my life that I kind of see the world through, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, let me try it this way. For 3 people, John Gardner, Arthur Miller, and Saul Bellow. 3 people who come to mind who have since answered this question. Obviously not about the last 10 or 20 years, not about Batman, but holding the bigger question in mind for a second, which is, what is the role of this? What are we doing here? What are stories for? We tell stories. Why? Fictional stories. And according to Gardner, the role of storytelling from oral tradition all the way back to whatever, back to Homer. Go back to just right to it. Okay, right to Homer. All right. But then continuing all the way through, through the Iliad and the Odyssey, all the way through, through the Greeks, through through Beowulf and English, going on and on, has been to instruct. It has been to it has been to speak into the community and to provide direction, structure, moral understanding, and a cohesiveness for cultural systems. It's meant to do something, right? That doesn't mean, first of all, some of it's successful and some of it's unsuccessful, some of it's good and some of it's bad. That's neither here nor there. The point is that the sitting down and the giving it a go has been purposive, right? And it has been to both instruct and entertain, as it were. And it seems like everybody on the planet, and I really do mean that. I mean, Japan, Peru, Cameroon, everybody seems to, in their own way, one way or another, has figured out if they're not entertained, they're not going to pay any freaking attention. Okay. It's like, whether they're going to sing and dance, whether they're going to do this, whether they're going to puppet shows, it doesn't matter what it is. Everybody, Bali puppeteering, it doesn't matter. Everybody on the planet has figured out that it's like over here, over here, over here, over here. So they have used this, right? Going back to Aristotle and rhetoric, right? Over here. Hello. Okay. What is it about composition that compels? All these guys, going back to Arthur Miller and John Gardner and Bellow, have been talking about, the purpose of fiction has been to educate and to entertain, but it has begun to change in the 20th century. And why has it changed in the 20th century? I know we're in the 21st century. I'm not lost, but 20th century is when you begin to take a bit of a change.
Yep.
I'm not enough of a historian of this to have the correct answer. And I do think there are actual answers. And I think that there are forces at work that have encouraged a kind of storytelling that allowed it to break off, as it were, from its origins, its roots, right? It's just kind of going off. That is to say, so-called escapism, so-called pure. Now, I'm not entirely sure that exists. I think there's just some stuff that's not very good, but I think cartoons maybe. Okay. I'm not against entertainment. I like entertainment. I like being entertained. I like jokes, but I still think the stuff that sticks is the stuff that's doing something beyond merely spinning plates, juggling ducks. I've never seen anybody juggle ducks. I would like to see somebody juggle ducks in that language. I would go to a duck juggler. I know that's not very nice, but I would still totally do that. Anyway, so, and I think that there's something about the market, something about capitalism, something about trying to make money from this stuff, trying to monetize stories in a way that mass media has made possible in a way that even books didn't quite. Right. I mean, the serialization of Charles Dickens or stuff, all that great stuff in the 19th century. It wasn't Game of Thrones, right? We're not talking, nobody's making billions of dollars. There was no, or even, or hundreds of millions or whatever, whatever ludicrous amount of money we want to talk about as we regress a little further into the past. Yeah. Now there is a market. Right. And there's a market. Now, I'm not against people getting paid for what they write and the art that they do and performing and all that. I'm not, I'm hardly against that. But I am saying that there seems to be a point now where the biggest budgets and the biggest efforts, the biggest production is going into whatever is going to make the biggest cash. This is sort of the Marvelization of Hollywood. And that is somewhat recent.
Yeah.
And so I do think that we've seen a movement starting in the 20th century with probably film that has started to separate out, the idea that storytelling has to be meaningful as opposed to merely escapist. And again, if I was a historian, I would start looking at things like Metropolis versus King Kong, which are both fantastic. The originals, and then obviously because of the time period that I'm talking about, and wondering where you start seeing that kind of a split. but I think we're at a point where we have two conflicting sort of impulses, and I'll end on this, which is that one of them is just suck in the money, suck in as much money as you possibly can, even if it's Minions 18, just do it, whatever it takes, right? And then the other one is to try to use the fact that there is an audience to start to shoehorn in ideology, politics, other sorts of things in a way that Americans for a long time didn't really do. The Europeans never stopped doing it. And there's a reason for that. Their experiences during the war, the difficulty of filmmaking, lots of reasons. We talk about that, but the Americans were sort of, a little bit like the past, man. That's the rear view mirror. That's yesterday. If it mattered where we came from, we'd still be there. It's like forward, right?
Yeah.
And I like that about America. Of course, the rest of the world is still out there. So I think that kind of break has started to happen now, and now they're starting to try, and like a bit like oil on water, they're trying to add ideology and politics into sort of high level film, and I think it's going very badly. And I think it's going very badly in the sense that the storytelling is ham-fisted. It's not good writing. It's not that I don't understand the impulse. It's just that that's not how it works.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with most of that, really. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Joseph Campbell. Would imagine that you might be. Yeah.
Well, I went to Sarah Lawrence. That's where he was a teacher for 1,000
Oh, wow.
years.
Oh, right. Awesome.
Whoa.
Yeah.
I love his work. I really enjoy reading his books and whatever kind of footage I can find of his. I like listening to him talk about the role of storytelling. I love how he is able to so clearly and concisely look at these myths and legends from across time and space and find these unique similarities within various cultures that don't connect, and as you were saying already, yes, absolutely, these the role of story is that the function is about creating culture, creating moral compasses for societies, for whichever place in which these stories are being told, but yeah, at the same time, there's this quote by G.K. Chesterton. I believe it's in one of his Father Brown stories. I can't remember off the top of my head now. But he makes this comment about being an individual is sort of the worst nightmare is being in a maze without a center. And what I find fascinating about that is I think about Joseph Campbell's conversation in The Power of the Myth, where he's discussing that the labyrinth is a mandala with but it's all shaken up. So the mandala is a very grand picture that all everything kind of focuses and then has a nice center. But then the labyrinth in his analogy is someone has shaken that up and therefore it's all confused and you can't get to where you need to get to. And what I find fascinating is I feel like and again, this is something that's this is potentially maybe more feeling than anything based on hard research. But when I watch films and I read books and things like that, there is the impression that is given that we are moving towards constantly wanting to deconstruct or remove certain heroes from their center point. We want to see someone wants to see certain types of heroes be lost and to some degree remain lost, and I think a couple of really interesting examples is that as we're seeing heroes kind of become centerless, fall into that Chesterton nightmare of being lost in a maze without a center. I think two really interesting examples of that I know people have talked about to death, but one is Luke Skywalker and one is Superman. And with Luke Skywalker, I don't know if you are, Derek, if you're familiar with the recent Star Wars movies. I can't remember if you've seen those or talked about those.
Yeah, no, I've seen them. I'm not sure I know you'll tell me you can summarize the controversy, but I think I know where you're going with this. But
Yeah.
I will Go ahead.
Yeah, so you have the Force Awakens and you have the Last Jedi, which the Force Awakens, they wrote Luke out of the story. There is a famous quote out there saying that he was too interesting and he was overshadowing all of the other characters. So the best way to handle it was to keep him out of the story. And then you come to the second film, in which Luke Skywalker is a bum on a planet doing nothing and does nothing and accomplishes very little. In the course of this movie, you know, people have waited 30 some odd years to finally see their hero return. He comes back and he is quite limp and lost, and it's depressing. Right. Similar with Superman, with Man of Steel, when that came out way back in 10 years ago almost. You know, you have Superman snapping Zod's neck in front of a terrified family, and you have a scene with Jonathan Kent telling Clark rather, that, well, maybe you shouldn't have saved those kids in that bus that was sinking into the river, you know. And it's just these things where it's like, well, these, you know, that's something you could see happening with a character like Batman. Batman is a much darker, psychologically disturbed character. Superman is the character that we all aspire to be that level of great. You know, we want to be that inspiring, that hopeful, you know, that's powerful, I guess. And when you see these heroic figures deconstructed in such a way, I really understand the strong response from fans and from this just kind of the general public, who see it and think, well, this just doesn't feel right. But there's a lot of people who they can't really articulate. They don't really understand why. And I feel it is linked with this problem of storytelling kind of losing its importance. And I think that losing the importance of what a certain kind of hero like these two figures ought to be.
Yeah, there's a lot going on here. Here's some high level quick thoughts, and then you can jump on which one you want to, and they're provocations as responses. One of them is, there is a political correctness that seeped into Hollywood, where a Marxist point of view has said, we're not going to portray Western colonial white characters as heroes and saviors anymore. And therefore we need to find out, but they bank, right? So in other words, we're not going to we're not going to, so while the British actually seems to have killed off James Bond, Americans are just a little too savvy for that sort of thing. So we got to find a way to take highly bankable characters and turn them into something that is going to fit this postmodern model. And I think that is an inherent tension that's taking place. We can discuss that if that interests you. I think there is a much deeper issue, which is not Hollywood based, which is that I think the West is losing confidence in itself. I think that we have a crisis of confidence about who we are, what we're doing, what makes us distinct, what is Western civilization anyway, which is, sort of, I was just listening to the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and it's so, who is this God person anyway, right? So, what is Western civilization anyway? And if we're so upset about our own origin stories, then how is it that we're going to find a way forward given various original sins? So, and that I think has become we have a crisis of confidence in the Enlightenment project and empirical reality and Western cultural identity and all sorts of things. And I think that that's going to end up in an organic way in our fiction. That is to say, our storytelling. And I mean that across the board. Film, poetry, the long form, the short form, whatever it is. I think that it is, I'm not going to start using German words, but it's in the, it's out there. It's out there, right? And it's out there because it's inherent to the actual discussion that we're currently having about who and what we are and what the hell we're doing here.
Yeah.
And so I'm not surprised that ends up in our art and fiction, which is a slightly different topic than the sort of more Marxist, aggressive, we're trying to destroy the foundations of those things and just demonstrate how all of them are bad. And the conservatives are not entirely wrong on some. I think they're wrong about why and how and where it comes from, and I think they're wrong about almost everything. But they're right about some of the observations.
Yes.
In other words, they are observing certain patterns. I think they're just attributing the wrong answers to them. But they're not wrong that there is a liberal hostility to the very countries that give them the basis on which to have opinions, and that irony is being lost on the so-called progressive left. And I think that we're seeing that in fiction as well. And then when it comes to some of the characters themselves, I'm not sure, because the last sort of high level point I would make is a lot of the characters that you mentioned, not Luke, of course, but the ones that originate in comic books, a lot of them were written by Jews, right? American Jews in the 1930s and mainly 40s and some 50s. And it is not a cultural mistake that a people who are, I'm a Jew, and so I wasn't born, but we weren't allowed to go into the PR firms, the communication firms, the various law firms. We couldn't get jobs, right? Because they didn't want Jews. And so a lot of them went into writing comic books, which is not what it became in the 70s, right? It wasn't, that was an empire. It was, golden era and all that stuff. But back then, but what were the nature of the fantasies that these guys were having? And I think they were all guys. If there are any women who were writing back then, I don't know about it, but I would love to know about it, because I'm sure that there are some really great people who have been buried in the past because they're women, by the way. And I just don't know about it. But they were writing these aspirational characters. They could be heroes. They could be giant, larger than life superheroes, to coin a phrase, right? And yet, of course, none of them were Jewish, right? I mean, it's because you couldn't have a Jewish superhero. You couldn't even have a Jewish regular hero. There's no Errol Flinowitz, right? That we weren't allowed to do that sort of thing, right? And so kids like me wouldn't have been able to grow up and do that kind of stuff. So, but that notion that you can feed into an American a society that was hungry for that, and coming out of the World War II, all of us, everybody, all Americans, we had something, I don't remember the exact number, we had something like 54% of the world's capital. I mean, we were enormous. We were enormous. I mean, we were Rome, and when the rest of the world had disappeared, and there was and so a lot of that was heartfelt and believed and sincere, and it was also naive, it was ignorant, it was also misguided, it was completely unaware of what was going on in Black America and all sorts of other things. So I'm not saying, but the thing is, for the people, but local life is always real. It's real to the people who are living it. Always, right? There's no such thing as an inauthentic life. That's why I'm tired of everybody trying to live their authentic lives. It's like, what do you think you were doing yesterday? I mean, by all means, do whatever you like, but there is no concept of an inauthentic life. It's undefinable. So anyway, I think that's another high level thing that was going on, is that we're, all these big heroes, there was room and space for that. And also, we believed in ourselves. We genuinely did, for good and for ill, for both. And I think that a lot of that is currently changing. So you have all these things coming that are changing the kinds of stories we're telling. And I'll just end by saying, I worked in international affairs for a long time, and working in intercultural issues was a core, a center of gravity of my work in international peace and security stuff. And I have long believed that the best way to understand a foreign society is to understand its art, is to watch what it is producing, what they're saying about themselves to themselves, and what is forbidden, what is allowed, what forms and meanings are being expressed, and all that sort of thing. And right now, what you're talking about is, in one way, it's about comic book characters and Luke not getting his getting short shrift, but it's also part of speaking into a culture that for which those moves are going to resonate. And if they don't resonate, if there's a fissure like you're describing, fans are pissed, but it's making money, and so there's clearly something going on here. Then instead of, I find it more interesting that rather than take a position, because really in the end, who gives a shit what happens to Luke? Right. Is what is that telling us if we stare at the friction for the what do you call it? The fault lines between these things. That's data. It's data about ourselves. And I find that very, very interesting, because trying to figure out what we're all going through right now is a big deal. And because there's no place that isn't falling apart, except maybe China, who are like, we'll just sit back and win.
Yes. Right? Yes. No, that's true. I mean, they it's quite interesting actually when you think about, when you say that, because I know, for example, Disney have bent the knee to them on several occasions, particularly with relation to Star Wars. They have reduced certain people of a certain background on their posters so that they're not as visible.
Oh, is that right? Just who? What?
Finn, the character of Finn, the played by what's his name? I can't remember his name.
John Boyega.
Yeah. John Boyega. Yeah, they reduced his image on the Force Awakens posters and stuff like that, and made it right small, way back in the back.
Because he's black.
Yep. And
that's the only thing I can think of.
Yep. That, and they have. There were certain films that I think wouldn't be seen. I think there was some controversy with Lightyear, because Lightyear had a gay relationship in it, and I can't remember if they edited it out or how they tweaked it, but there was some controversy with that as well.
Right.
But yeah, no, that is, yeah. I mean, it's the comment you made about losing confidence. I think that's a big thing. Just I'm a big fan of the hard-boiled fiction of the 40s and 50s, and I guess it really starts in the 1920s. And because I find that period so interesting in relation to what these writers are doing in response to the disillusionment of World War I, followed by the economic devastation of the stock market crash, followed by World War II. But still retaining a sense of striving for individuality, striving for some sort of moral center, even though it's maybe accomplished through gray means.
You can create a moral story that ultimately, like Chinatown, shows that we are living in a dark period where nothing is working, but it doesn't. I don't think it has to have a happy ending to be, as it were, a moral story. But it is to say, when you watch something like Chinatown, I realize Chinatown's later. That what you're talking about, that was the 70s, I think.
Yes.
But Chinatown ultimately that nihilistic, tragic ending, to Chinatown holds up to us what we hoped for and then takes it away, and thereby making what we hoped for even more visible. And this goes back to one of my personal theories about why it is everybody likes Stephen King novels so much, which is that he's a great writer, he's a great storyteller, all that. I'm not trying to piss up stairs, so to speak. But the thing is that one of the reasons I like Stephen King is one of the reasons I like John Irving, who is a very different writer. And the thing is that I love the worlds that Stephen King destroys. In other words, I'm not I don't think Gotham has a lot going for it, you know. So when Gotham takes a hit, I kind of get it. On the other hand, when it's called Derry or wherever it was made, but anyway, whatever the town that starts with the D in Maine, because you know Maine is clearly the scariest place on earth, and you know, and I'm from New England, so you know, but it's but it is. We love, and the perfect example of that is Stand By Me, right? So you have that idyllic 1950s boy life that he's growing up in, you know, and it was a great movie too with River Phoenix and the rest of it, but it was this life is what he's attacking with all these, you know, whatever it is, whatever evil thing he's pulled out and destroyed. So we're attracted to what he's destroying. And the John Irving stuff, he sets it in those kinds of New England villages, but he doesn't destroy them, or at least he doesn't destroy them in the same way, right? Like in Owen Meany or something like that. And
no, that's true. No, I think that makes your comment about how, you know, these stories don't have to have happy endings is really important, because I agree with that wholeheartedly. I mean, being a fan of hard-boiled fiction, none of those books have a happy ending.
No,
it is all
probably
it's all bittersweet. It's all it's mostly bitter more than sweet, but there's a couple of sweet moments in there every once in a while. And thinking about that in relation to, go on, you have a comment.
Well, no, but I'm thinking if you go back to these characters, which I think we often forget, in the same way that I think we forget this about Western. The Western was a period of time in American history right after the American Civil War, which means that these guys, for which there were 700,000 dead. You know, bodies buried in massive pits. Soldiers had to stamp down the bodies, you know, in the pits, soaked in blood, in order to get them, you know, below ground level. I mean, these were the guys who were then going west, right? There was no peace and reconciliation process. There was no, like I used to work on the UN, what was called disarmament, demobilization, reintegration of ex-combatants. There was no reintegration of ex-combatants after our Civil War. There was just a bunch of guys who had, you know, who shot each other over cards, you know, which you've got to recognize there's a little PTSD there, right? Because that's probably overreacting, you know, in a Pulp Fiction sort of sense, right? Probably, you know, I mean, that would be viewed as overreacting. That's not to say I don't think Unforgiven is a great movie. I think Tombstone is a great movie, but we forget that a lot of these guys were soldiers and they are just messed up after work. Jumping ahead to your hard-boiled fiction. As you said, this is a period of, whether it's existentialism in the 1920s, whether it's this period of breaking, of fundamentally questioning, you know, is there a God? Is there progress? You know, industrialized capacity to kill, people dying from, you know, poison gas and on the battlefield. I'm talking World War I here, let alone what happened during the Holocaust. But in all this hard-boiled world is you still feel like there's an aspiration, there's a desire to do good. There's a want to do something, even if all you can do is find the girl or it's like just anything. If there's any decent thing, because the thing is, otherwise they wouldn't be in pain. They wouldn't be upset. They wouldn't be suffering. And you wouldn't be connecting with those characters. Those are interesting people. Nihilists are not actually interesting because they don't want anything. They don't believe in anything. They can't drop any further, you know. So I think that those you know, the Western, that period, these are big people dealing. And the thing is that we're dealing with those. We in society are reading these characters who are going to enact what we're feeling for us. And so I think that, and even if it's darkness, even if it's just a desire to just kill somebody, even if they, you know, it's a bit like in a John Wick kind of way. It's, you know, but the thing about John Wick though is that it's the choreography is amazing, the cinematography is amazing. You know, it's a kind of fun, and I like the movies, but they're cookies. I mean, it's a Snickers bar when it comes right down to it. It's a very, very shiny and expensive Snickers bar. And I say that because there isn't really a story there, and there isn't anything that is connecting us to other than our desire to simply watch really beautiful people kick the living crap out of each other. Because there is not an ugly person on screen, whether it's male or female. These are just beautiful examples of people slaughtering each other of every race, religion, and you know, height, right? Might be one fat guy, you know, but that's about it, right? You know, can we still say fat guy? Fat guy.
I don't know.
I'll say it twice to make sure. But I think that but I think back to moral stories and the point of storytelling, even those dark stories, and maybe not even, maybe part of their function and the reason we are still so connected to them is because of when done well, it gave form and structure and cohesiveness and coherence to what we as an audience or reader and a culture were unable to articulate in another way.
Yeah. I agree with that wholeheartedly.
It's important.
It is. I agree. And I think kind of building off that with these characters trying to do good. They have a desire to do good. They have a desire to save the girl, something. Is absolutely right. And I think that's when I think about that in relation to some of these earlier things we were talking about, i.e., you know, Superman or Luke Skywalker in particular. There is this, what was his desire? What was his good desire, you know, in The Last Jedi? I don't really think he had one. The script says he comes and, you know, he does this force projection thing to kind of delay some people, but what does he actually do? That, you know, he doesn't really do anything heroic. But at least these former characters, the Marlows, the whatnot, what have you, they're at least, while imperfect and doing imperfect things, they still have, you saying, that desire to do some sort of good. To, if there's one bad guy taken off the street, then at least one less bad guy taken off the street. You know, Luke Skywalker could have at least got off his fucking planet and, like, you know, confronted his psychopath nephew, but he didn't. He got his little projector out and did some other, you know, Wizard of Oz trickery. Which I think brings me to, like, kind of the next point, though, is this isn't so much about, you know, Luke Skywalker, but the writing. Are writers like Rian Johnson and others who are writing these Marvel movies and things like that, do they really, in their quest to kind of deconstruct these heroes, it seems they don't really understand their purpose. And I feel like their particular purpose is for us, as I mentioned, is really to look and see the unattainable kind of goodness that they are and try and achieve that.
But see, I'm not sure. I think pardon me, you're wondering about and speculating something that for me is behind a curtain that I can't penetrate, which is to say, what are the actual motives of the people who are doing or engaged in an activity that I can observe, but I don't know why they're doing it. And one has to be careful about imputing motive to people that, you know, in a sense that are in play in a way. So to make it less academic or you're anchoring what from what you just said. My interpretation of what you just said is that you're anchoring your hopes and aspirations for a character like Luke Skywalker in what you see to be, and I agree with you, by the way, the dramatic arc of what that character, where he begins on Tatooine and you know, Luke, you know, we get from that all the way to it as an old man. Okay. What is that Joseph Campbell mythic arc going to look like? And in the stories that we know, we got to hear, right, which is sort of Sunset, and then they took it from there And instead of following the arc towards its natural path, they just kind of like a bad firecracker, just went, and it ended up in somebody's swimming pool. Okay. I see what you mean. Now, if we use that as our analytical lens, then yes, we should sit here and we can just sort of berate them for screwing up. But what if that's not the analytical lens? What if the purpose, and now I'm just completely just speculating and talking at the coffee shop. What if the point is to say, listen, all of your nostalgia, all you old people and your nostalgia for those, for what we have now called episodes 4, 5, and 6 or whatever, or, which was a joke, right? It was originally meant to be a galaxy, far, far away, long time ago, episode 4. It's very clever, but it was never meant to be episode 4. It was a gag, right? It's called frickin' Star Wars. I mean, it's the most ridiculous, hokey name you could possibly have. It's basically Pulp Fiction. It's Amazing Story. It's called... Amazing Stories was called Amazing Stories. Talk about it on the nose, right? They didn't even try. They're like, how about Amazing Stories? They're like, well, it is 4:45 on a Friday. Amazing Stories it is. Okay, so let's just name it and go home. Okay, Star Wars. It was all a bit of fun. That isn't to say they didn't do it extraordinarily well. Evidently they did, but it was a bit tongue in cheek, and it was closer towards Mel Brooks than you think. Do you know what I'm saying? It wasn't. They didn't mean it as Beowulf, right? They meant to have a good time. Yeah. And one of the reasons those early movies were so damn good, aside from the casting and everything else, was that you got a sense that, number one, they did not know that they were doing something long in life. They were just setting out to tell a really great story and have a really fun time doing it. And the cast, as they're sitting there in their underwear and Wookiee suits, knows full well that we're a bunch of grown-ups being very, very silly. And so when Leia, insults, says, get this walking nerf herd or whatever out of my way, there's a sense of joy and lightness that they have tried with millions of dollars to replicate. And they haven't, because the thing is, the basic setting isn't there anymore, because they've taken themselves very seriously. They've drunk their own Kool-Aid, as it were. But here's the thing. They're making a god-awful sum of money, and it's working. It's working, right? It may be pissing off the faithful, but here's the thing. Do they care anymore? It's like the GOP. Do they care? Old school Republican, Bob Dole, Bill Cohen from Maine, right? George Bush, the grown-up, not the younger goofball. These were Republicans. These were people. You're like, if Bob Dole has an opinion about missiles in Kazakhstan and whatever, you're like, okay, well, what is it? Right. I disagree with you on the tax rate, but the guy's a professional. The guy's serious, right? John McCain. Those people don't exist anymore, right? Those, aside from the fact that they're old and they're dead, and I know all that. But my point is that these kinds of Republicans in the United States, they don't exist. They have been squashed, and I partly blame John McCain because he chose, Sarah Palin as running mate. He knew better. He did it anyway, and it's his fault. And God bless him for a lot of other things, but he knew better, and yet he did it, and we're all suffering from it. The GOP, they're saying, well, he's only, they're only talking to their radical right-wing base. Yeah, they are, and it's working. Yeah. Now, it's ripping the country apart, and I'm not entirely convinced that 150 years from now there will be a United States that we entirely recognize, but that's a larger conversation. But linking Star Wars and the GOP and the future of the United States together, because why not? What else is a show like this for, right? Except we're not drinking enough. Is they're not playing to what used to be the core, what used to be the base, what used to be the party faithful. They're playing to something else. There's a new kind of postmodern thing going on. When I say postmodern, the easiest way to think of it is, aside from, is you snip the cord on the traditional relationship between talk and empirical reality. And now the talk goes off on its own, like a cloud. The wind blows and off it goes. It's sort of like taking you off the gold standard, right? Yeah. Is that there's no longer a relationship between money and gold. Now money is just nonsense, right?
Yeah.
And it has been like this since the 70s, but now we have crypto, which is really just it's taking the nonsense and being like, listen, it's all nonsense. It's just nonsense, right? It's just all complete, total chaos nonsense, right? And so it's like betting on it. That's it. It's its own metaphor at this point.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure when they're making these movies anymore that whether they're trying to round out and land these characters. I'm not sure whether or not they care about where they've come from and where they're going. I'm not convinced that they are. I think that they are devices that are being used in order to build franchises and create stability in a marketplace that's otherwise very, very scary, because nobody knows what is going to sell. Nobody knows how this stuff works, right?
Yeah.
It's the whole, the only thing I know is that nobody knows anything kind of comment, right?
Yeah.
And so what they're trying to do is stabilize the future.
Yeah.
Why? Because everybody wants to pay their mortgage, because the world is a scary place. And, if it pisses off a couple of people on the internet because they don't like what we did with Batman, well, they can go scream into a pillow. Meanwhile, we're grown-ups and we have to go run, a multi-billion-dollar enterprise.
Yeah.
And so I get it, but part of the problem is that, do movies have to be this fucking expensive? I mean, do they?
No.
I mean, honest to God, quick thing. My kids, my son's 14 years old. My son, therefore, has grown up in the universe of all the Marvel movies. So of, all of them, the whole thing, right? The whole kit and caboodle, right? And he saw Endgame and he saw all this stuff. And I liked them, by the way. I like the Marvel movies. I'm not down on them. So I enjoy them, and now they're behind me because I'm an adult. But, still. All right. But recently we rented a couple of movies from the 80s, and these included Ferris Bueller's Day Off, Speed, Beverly Hills Cop, and Die Hard. And Romancing the Stone.
Nice.
So okay, so it's so I'm because I'm properly educating my children, right?
Yeah.
So the thing is, though, when they were watching Speed, which is a great movie by any standard, but they were on the edge of seats. They were gripping.
Yes.
My daughter too, who's 11. They were absolutely on the edge of things. So and what's the special effect? A bus, hits a couple of cars on the expressway or whatever. In other words, there's no CGI. There's the big set piece scenes are extraordinarily well done, but they're not Doctor Strange, right? And yet these are the ones where my kids are on the edge of their seat. The realism, the intensity, the honesty, the sincerity, the simplicity of the storytelling absolutely captured them. And one thing that was so helpful for me to see is we're all looking for external confirmation that we're not just, not actually, we're clearly not, but the better of us are looking for confirmation that we're not just living in our own heads, that what we think might actually be grounded in some sort of actual truth. And kids don't lie. They just, and even if they lie, they're not entirely. Did you eat that? No. Yeah, you did. But the thing is that, but the thing is, when they watch a movie, you can see it on their face, not developed, Khrushchev face, right? They're not Russian. They're not, they are watching. They're in it, and so they're adoring this stuff. Yeah. And what that proves to me is the stuff's actually good. It's actually good. It's not just because it's nostalgic. It's not just because I was a kid. It's not just because I'm taking it with me. I don't, I still like 38 Special songs, and I know that they're not great, but I grew up with them, and I still like them. Okay, they're seeing it fresh, and if they don't like it, they don't like it.
Yeah.
And they love it. They love it. And the thing is that I guess my point, if I may, is that you've gone from movies that cost $50 million to make to movies that cost $150, $200 million to make.
Yeah.
And they are blingy and they're impressive and but they're not better. They might be better, but they're not necessarily better. In other words, you haven't gone, and this isn't just the cost of inflation. This is the whole thing. I remember when I was a kid watching like Letterman or Scorsese on Letterman or something. At one point he said, I literally know how you, I don't know if he said literally, but what he said was, I don't know how you spend more than $60 million on a movie. He says, I guess you just pocket the rest. you know. But the thing is that yes, they now know how to spend that, but now it costs so much, and they're so afraid and they're so terrified. I think what you're looking at is a corp. They've boxed themselves into a universe that really none of us need, and yet because it's sucking all the oxygen out of the other stuff, and all I can do is be grateful for. I don't really like the use of this term, but everybody uses it, so I'll use it, which is the democratization of filmmaking. Because you really can make a movie on an iPhone now, right? I'm not saying it's easy, and I'm not saying it makes storytelling but you can, whereas you actually couldn't in the 70s, because you couldn't pay for the film, you couldn't pay for the development. You just, it was that was unavailable to you. You know, videotapes, VHS bait, all that was our first inkling. I mean, I guess you could say, you know, Super 8 was really the sort of the first one. Was silent, but still had to develop it. You could still only make, you know, 12-minute movies in art class or whatever. But videotape, but really especially now with digital, which has only been, I don't know, mid 2000s or so, whenever Collateral came out with Tom Cruise, I think, which was one of the first big ones. But now you can, and I think that's wonderful, and I think we do need that. But it still means, though, that distribution, finance, and the whole model has become turned on its head. And this, of course, is why they're terrified, because you know, somebody like Phil can go, and you can go make Phil as a filmmaker, you can go make something. You know, I'm not saying it's easy, but you can go make a 15-minute short, you know, and if it's good, if it captures the imagination, speaks to the soul, it entertains, it does all that sort of stuff, you know, you can put it on the internet, and it can go viral, and it can do something magical. Whereas 20 years of that, and so they're just trying to make the Death Star blow up even bigger. And the problem is that the kids don't care. I can see my kid not caring. Yeah, I don't care. You know, so because it's not what I remember. It's not what I remember about Guardians of the Galaxy, which I loved. I loved that movie. What I remember is him taking off after the big thing, and the pink pretty girl coming down and goes, "Oh, I forgot you were there." It's like, it's a great line. That's the guy we all want to be. No, you know, it's a throwaway joke, but that's the stuff you remember, because that's the humanity. That's the part that's fun. The spaceships are great, but you don't need them.
No, it's interesting, because it kind of reminds me of when I apply that to crime fiction. No one gives a shit about the twist. No one
about what?
No one gives a crap about the twist in crime fiction.
The twist.
You're right. You know, you think of Sherlock Holmes stories, you think of Agatha Christie stories, you think of modern stuff, Gone Girl, whatever the hell. No one cares about the twists. What they are interested in, and what they take away, are similar to what you're saying, are these character moments, these one-liners, things like that.
That's interesting. Do you? Because I mean, because you're really a crime fiction guy in a way that I'm not. And so do you think that's the case? Because every review I read is a twisty this, twisty that. I was just watching Enola Holmes with my daughter.
I'm sorry.
Well, that's okay, but I like Millie Bobby Brown, and the set design is nice, and you know, and what entertains an 11-year-old is not meant to entertain a 52-year-old. So it's fine, you know. You know, but the thing is, there was some point in the movie where they just, you know, they like intensely explain the plot in you know, about what happened basically in 40 seconds. You know, I got a PhD. I don't know what the hell they were talking about. Something to do with matches, and it's red, and it's the boy that killed this, but then this guy, and he wanted to make money, but he couldn't. Had to take out a loan, but his dog's former owner. I don't care because the thing is, none of that happened. You know, I don't know. And I'm sitting here watching, and you know, so I'm enjoying the other stuff. I'm enjoying the swashbuckling moments
Yes.
and all that kind of thing. And I also like the fact that there's I like there need to be more Nancy Drews. There need to be more Enola Holmes. There need to be more. I do think there need to be way more characters like that for girls, because they need to not see the boys having all the fun, because there's nothing we can inherently do other than lift large boxes that they can't do. So that's which doesn't come up very much in terms of detective work. So I would I like that, and I think when you have kids and when you have a daughter or something, you want to make sure the world is much more filled with that kind of stuff. Yes. But it isn't the twist, because as you said, I mean, I don't care.
No,
I'm writing a book right now where that's on my mind.
Yeah, no, I think the twists and stuff like that, I think that is, as you're saying, reviewers, yes. Bites for Twitter, yes, that's where you put that crap.
That's the thing.
The back of the book. But, any time I've been to a convention or, a crime gathering of crime writers, and readers.
Crime gathering. Wording on that.
No one is talking. No one really sits there and dwells on, oh, did you read that, that new book by person X, Ian Rankin's new book, and did you see that twist coming? No. You're like, oh no, there's this really fascinating moment in this particular book by Ian Rankin where, these two characters had this really interesting conversation. I really liked what that commentary was. Like it's having something to say.
No, I believe that. I mean, it's interesting to hear you say that, because you're more immersed in this stuff than I am. But I recently rewatched Heat. With which really stood up. I really thought it was still a really good movie.
Yeah.
But for one thing, the plot wasn't terribly complicated. They want to steal some stuff because they want the stuff, and the other guy wants to catch him because that's his job, and that's that. So it's not a terribly complicated thing. But what you remember from Heat is the mood, the feeling. You remember very particular scenes. I was watching it with a writer's eye, which I don't always do, but I wanted to see what they were doing. And the Al Pacino's character, who he portrayed beautifully. I mean, he's utterly fascinating. But if it hadn't been Al Pacino, not porcino, sounds like a food. If it hadn't been Al Pacino, Al Portobello, Al Franken, whatever his name. If it hadn't been him, it's actually a pretty thin character. It's like guy gets divorced a couple of times, because he's just too obsessed with catching the bad guy, and he's been doing it so long he doesn't know what else to do, and he really doesn't want to retrain, for something else. There's nothing really there. Yeah. Just, it's just he actually made it very interesting. But the moments you remember is them sitting at the coffee shop together, and having that moment, and and Val Kilmer's girlfriend kind of waving him off, and then seeing Val's face sort of sink, say knowing that he's never going to see her again, but she just saved his life, and those are the takeaways. Those are the intense human moments.
Yes. Yeah. I mean,
I agree with you.
What do people remember about The Big Sleep? Him being in the bookshop. That's not the big reveal at the end, in which, Carmen and Vivian are responsible for everything. It's the bookshop scene. It's those moments. It's Philip Marlowe's first entry into the Sternwood mansion. That's what people remember.
I mean, I think, I don't know. I'd have, we're, just sort of drifting into this topic of twists, though, is, there's certainly some in film history and in books that have been, epic. I mean, going back to Chinatown, my sister and my daughter, she's my sister and my daughter, like, oh, now I get it.
Yeah.
Okay. And that one's so good because it's like what's directly in front of our face, our own, sense of, not sense of, but our own sort of, it's a line that we just have a hard time crossing, right? It's
Yes.
incest. It's horrible.
Yes.
And we just kind of couldn't go there, but they could. So it is a revelation, which to me is very different than almost any. I'm not as big an Agatha Christie fan as everybody else, because, and it's not that I don't like her. It's not that I don't respect the artistry or any of that. It's just that they're utterly unsolvable. I mean, in other words, there's it's I just watched Death on the Nile, the one that Kenneth Branagh directed, and it was very good, and it got my kids really interested. But when whatever Hercule Poirot says something about, oh well, this red dye from this paint doesn't dissolve, and okay, number one, if you say so, because I still don't know if it's true. Number two, what was I supposed to? It wasn't like the dye, the red dye.
Yeah,
that's what it was. No, whereas Chinatown was like, it's right in front of your face.
Yes.
Ooh,
come on, come on. Are you gonna see it? You're still not gonna see it? Okay, here it is. Which is almost the Luke and Darth, but with Luke and Darth Vader, I don't think it was right in front of your face. I think it was just, it was a big story moment, and that became, and that's become emblematic, because that's what Hollywood wants now, and they're being talked into it. But I still don't know with publishers. I think they're as terrified as the movie industry, but for totally different reasons. Because
I agree.
They don't know what's going to sell, and they don't know what to buy, and they're afraid, and so they're trying to, because what makes something engaging and lovable and memorable and an author that you want to be connected to, you want to be around, is quite ineffable. And the problem is that business plans don't like ineffable.
No.
Right?
No.
They want to F the ineffable. They want it effed. Which isn't a word.
No, but I think I think in relation to publishing, in particular crime publishing, most publishers, most agents are looking for the next imitation. They're not looking for an original story. They're not looking for anything. They want something that feels like and looks like and sounds like person A and B, so that they can put that on the dust jacket.
It might be, but it might be, but the thing is that as somebody who's written this stuff now, like take somebody like Val McDermid. Okay, she's a very good writer, but she's also just a lovely human being. She's nice to other people, and she does it for no other reason than it's her character. That's who she is. So I don't know her that well, but she's for no particular reason has done some very nice things for me, and I'm very grateful, because she's much farther up in the experience ladder than I am. I mean, let alone fame and fortune, but she's walked across bridges that I haven't reached yet, and it's nice to be able to talk to sort of an elder statesman, not to talk about age, but you know what I mean.
Right. Yeah,
but the elder statesman in the thing, and she's one of them. And so when she picked out American by Day as one of her top 5 crime novels of the year at one point, and she said it was because, in her write-up, she said it was because it was so unexpected, and because these characters really let rip with her ideas, and you just didn't know where all this was going to go, or something along those lines. I'm paraphrasing. Yet it didn't sell. Right. I mean, my reviews couldn't have been any better. It was shortlisted for the Gold Dagger. It was, all that.
It's a terrific book. I really love it.
Thanks.
I've mentioned it in my my research paper, by the way. It has mentioned in there.
You. Great. Well, that'll buy me a house, I'm sure.
So, there you go.
But that'll take care of it. But the, I don't know what people thought. Is it a follow up to another book, or I don't know. But it's still, I would love to have brought Irving Irving Wiley back as another character. I had more fun. If I could be any character from any of my novels, it would have been Sheriff Irving Wiley. I mean, the guy just doesn't have any baggage I wouldn't be able to deal with. I mean, he's genuinely happy human being. He likes his job. He's having a good time. He's divorced. It doesn't matter. He's not an alcoholic. He's not got drug addiction. He's an old theologian turned sheriff, and he's having a blast. And I had a joy writing it, and I'd like to be the guy, or I'd like to have his frame of mind anyway.
Yes.
But so the thing is that even when you deliver the unexpected, it doesn't necessarily work because. True. And that's the thing. So, Kirkus likes it, and Publishers Weekly likes it, and Library Journal likes it, and CW, Crime Writers Association, likes it. But, but either the audience doesn't hear about it or something, because you don't know. You don't know why the dog didn't bark in the night, right? Yeah. And that's the thing.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of that I think also has to do with marketing. And
of course it does.
There is the people say it all the time, they know what is going to be the bestseller a year before it comes out.
And I suppose, but
yeah.
What?
I think there's truth to that.
I didn't interrupt you.
No, I think there's truth to that. And I think that is one of the kind of the uphill battles that I think writers in general all have to deal with. They're great. One of their great books might end up being overlooked because, well, Richard Osman has front row, in everything, so everything else gets buried.
Part of that is that when they give somebody $500,000 advance, they have no choice but to go promote it until somebody drops dead, because they need their money back. Now, they don't necessarily need 500 back, because the thing is that what the author, it is actually incorrect math that they need to pay off the advance in order to make money, even though that a lot of agents work under that premise. That's not how the math works, but they still need to make money. And so they're going to double down on things where they need to recoup their losses, or at least their sunken costs. They're not necessarily losses, but they're sunken costs at that point. I'm not so sure that they know what's going to sell, though, because for one thing, I was with Houghton Mifflin Harcourt, and now that Houghton Mifflin Harcourt fiction no longer exists, let's talk shit about them. They didn't know. Yes. They didn't know how to sell books. Now, the thing is, they had some fantastic editors. And the problem is that having wonderful editors who know what they're doing to help an author craft the material into the best it can be, right? So it has integrity, and it is the diamond that was in the rough. That should be what an editor's job are. And there are they had some wonderful editors. Pardon me. But the problem is that Houghton Mifflin didn't know how to make use of the books that they had, and then in order to sell them on, and so they got gobbled up by HarperCollins. Now, my backlist is now with them, and I'm agnostic on the matter because I don't know. I mean, they're HarperCollins, so okay, you're one of the big five, and so ostensibly you should know what you're doing, but I don't know what they're going to do with the backlist material, and I don't know what commitment they're going to have, and I don't know what they're going to do. So it's, there's a lot to, but as I have to deal with, and as my agent does, and as the rest of us do, is it's pretty much always about moving forward. Yeah. Because it's the next book. So, my next novel, which is called The Curse of Pietro Houdini, which will be out someday. That's still being negotiated, but that's what I have to focus on right now as the main book, which I'm happy to do because I love the thing and I want it to do well. And I'm now with Avid Reader Press at Simon & Schuster in America, and I'm with Transworld at Penguin Random House in the UK, and I'm with Writers House as my reps. And so I'm where I want to be. I really couldn't be surrounded by a better dream team. These are wonderful. 2 wonderful editors, a brilliant agent, and I'm where I want to be. But Jesus Christ, trying to get everybody's attention. It's like, hello, I'm, finalist for the National Jewish Book Award. Don't care. I was, what was it, 2 or 3 times? No, twice I got nominated for the Gold Dagger. Nobody cares. One dagger. Nobody cares. I mean, nobody cares. Nobody cares.
Yes. Yes. Well,
the best.
Go on.
The last thing I was just going to. No, this is the last thing I was going to say. The best award I ever got was called the Goldsboro Last Laugh Award from Goldsboro Books.
Yeah.
It was, which means that I officially have an award-winning sense of humor now.
There you go. Wonderful.
And that's just priceless. That's priceless.
Yep. Oh, it's true. No, it's funny because we don't know what the you can't necessarily guarantee what the people want. And I guess there are those coveted places of we want you in the supermarkets, we want you here and there.
Sure.
And I do think sadly I think they give that dominance to stuff that all looks the same. It's complicated. It's not easy. It's complicated. And I think there are great books that go overlooked as a result.
Of course there are. And in fact, this is why, while the publishers will never tell you this because they can't, and the critics won't tell you this because they can't, and the reviewers won't tell you, because all of the people that I'm mentioning, they're all on the front edge of whatever's next, right? Because it's an industry and it's a wave, and the wave keeps moving forward, right?
Yes.
But the best books have already been written, right? I mean, it doesn't mean that there isn't going to be a great book in the future that should join the pantheon of great works. But we have literally thousands of years of backlist, right? So if you can't find something to read, you're not trying very hard, right? So you don't actually have to rush off and buy whatever's new. And I assure you that if you were to buy, my science fiction Radio Life or The Girl in Green or Norwegian by Night, these books are as present for me now as they were then. So it's some people like, oh, I don't want to go backwards in time. I mean, I'm not going to be, but my feeling is no, go spelunking, go, the antiquarian approach, which is a term that isn't used much anymore, but the antiquarian approach of this sort of going into an old musty bookstore and finding something that interests you for no other reason than it interests you right now. Something about the cover, the smell, the binding, the little gold stuff on the corner, the fact that there's just that made a creaking sound, and you get this feeling that nobody's opened this book in 70 years and you're the first person, and you're curious what it feels like to be the first person to wonder about this text in 70 years. And is there a sentence, an observation, an idea that might capture your imagination and work its way into your next movie, the next lyric that you write when you're playing guitar, there's that magic is real. And it isn't just because whatever Richard Osman or something wrote some novel right now. It's a lot of that's out there. So I encourage people, if you loved something, dig into the person's backlist. That's not their past. It's like their children. Believe me, they're as present in your author's lives now as they were then. If you saw, John Irving and you wanted to talk about, A Prayer for Owen Meany, I'm sure he'd be delighted.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I completely agree with that. It is rare when I am purchasing a brand new book. It is I more frequently purchasing an older book, someone's deep in someone's backlist or something along those lines, whether that's going to the brick and mortar store, through Amazon, or in the charity shop. It is genuinely rare when I'm buying something brand spanking new, because there's so much stuff out there, as you were saying. Go on.
Because Phil, because when you're making films, I feel like in the film world, people are like people who do both filmmaking, and I mean any aspect of it. It could be scoring, it could be writing, it could be anything really. I feel like when I talk to people, film people, I feel like they want to sort of look. I feel like time is very broad for them. In other words, they're just as happy to reference movies from the from the 50s and 60s. I'm talking about people, real nerds, real film lovers, right? I'm not talking about fan fiction, but they want to talk about Goddard movies. They want to talk about your Godfather movies, your French Connection, the car chase, and whatever. And I feel like those pieces and those things are still very alive when I talk to film people. But sometimes feel like I'm talking to book people. I feel like a little bit more. It's sort of like, well, it's about now, right? They're trying to stay current and trying to stay alive. And I might be wrong, but it's an impression I have.
That's an interesting observation, because that's kind of true, at least with myself. Like, I just go back to Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and just like reference like that close up of the creature that's awoken, and you have that like when he opens his eyes and everything, and I'd be like, I want to put that in this in this shot. I want to do that, and it doesn't matter. But then again, to be like, but I mean, movies only had like a century to.
That's right. That's true.
Of life, but at the same time, I'm not. Here's a sad thing. I am just not a very big reader, which is very unfortunate to be said on this podcast, unfortunately. But but maybe Luke has some insight on this as well, because there might be some truth to that.
No, I think that's true. I think in speaking to filmmakers, speaking to script writers, things like that, there is absolutely way more intentional going back to the past and mining it and taking inspiration from it and living in that past than I think there are with book with writers of novels and things like that. But I think you see the same with people who are steeped in the theater world. And I think you see the same people steeped in comic book writing as well. That's true. Really, it does seem that there is a weird writer bubble in which the novelists bubble is trying to again be in the here and the now, but the only things they're mentioning from the past are kind of, I want to not to sound rude, but like maybe the cliched classics, the typical stuff you expect people to sort of say that they've read. So it is an interesting observation. I think, but I would say there's truth to it.
I wonder if it's just because books just take too long to, they take a long time. They're a big commitment to,
they are,
because you can, you watch a movie, you sit back, you put your feet up, an hour and a half later, it's over. You like it, you don't like it, but there it is, right? A novel is 10 and a half hours, right? It's which you're not going to read, you're talking, a week and a half, could take you a month and a half, if you don't like it, it's going to take you 3 months. Right. I mean, if I don't like it, I don't finish it. I mean, there's got to. I have a book. There was a book, and it was John Gardner's. I mean, John Gardner's The Art of Fiction, I think, is one of the most important pieces of nonfiction work for all writers to read. But I read, I think it was called The August Light or something like that, and it was one of his novels, and I swear to God, it took me 18 months to get through, and I just, because I'm like, I have to finish it. I have to finish it based on principle, based on this, and I don't. I give up books all the time. I don't finish 80% of what I start reading.
Same.
And I do it with impunity. You don't amuse me. Off you go. Life's too short. But I had to get through that one. I forced, but it just took me forever. Honestly, if I had read it out loud, it would have taken less time. Than it took me. Yes. I don't know why. Because I look at all the audiobooks. Audiobooks are what? They're 10 hours, ish.
Yeah, roughly.
But just spitballing it, right?
Yep.
10 hours worth of it, which means that if you just sat and read it out loud to yourself, it would have been over in no time. But I couldn't do it.
I needed to with part of my research paper, my supervisor encouraged me to read and connect Henry James's The American to hard-boiled fiction. I am not a big Henry James fan in general. He's fine. I'm not saying he's a bad writer. I'm just saying his work is good, but it's not something that I go to for
Sure.
enjoyment
So
or
your cup of tea.
nourishment. Yeah, it's not my cup of tea.
Mhm.
The way I got through that was a combined effort, which is also because like I'm slow and like slightly I'm dyslexic, so it takes me sometimes a little bit longer to finish a book. But I got through that book by having the audiobook on while reading the page. And it was reading. I
Huh.
think the audiobook was on, I think, like time, because on Audible you can speed it up, and I think I
Sure.
had it on maybe 1.5 or close to 2 or something like that. So
Wow.
it was a quick read, so I was able to strike what was relevant as I was reading through it. But it was a quick speed read, which was nice because it made this. I think that book is a little bit long. I think the book's maybe I think it's probably about 10 hours long, but reading it that way, crunch that down to about 5 hours. Still a heck of a lot of time.
A mere 5 hours.
That's still, the Return of the King plus a short film afterwards, I suppose.
Sure.
But yeah. I suppose we should round off our discussion because we veered off
right.
into the glories of publishing and crime
So
writing.
conversation works. That's right.
It's great.
The one thing I do want to chat about, though, briefly before we close up, though, is the role of humanities, because we're talking about mentioning my PhD. You have a doctorate, you're a writer. I'm interested in bringing this back to the art of storytelling, and the role and function of storytelling in society. What then do you think is the how do humanities play into this?
Well, I think there's to me there's the core my core question is, what role should the humanities be playing in our social, political, and cultural life right now in the West? And and when I say the humanities, what I'm talking about are those fields that are primarily concerned with acts of meaning. That is to say, the study and enactment of the human experience. And which is, so this is what are broadly the arts, but also history and philosophy and the rest. These are the departments that are in Great Britain. They're being gutted. In the United States, they're being gutted. I'm not sure what the situation is in Canada, but I'm not optimistic. And the reason is because more and more the role of the university is to churn out Homo economicus, right? You're supposed to go get a degree that its primary purpose is to make you an economically viable unit in a capitalist system. And the thing is, that's not what university has historically been for, going back to the academy and going back to Aristotle's academy. And it isn't, and the irony is it's not going to work, because before I answer the question of why the humanities, the other stuff is, I'll flat out say it, we're going to lose. We're going to lose, because there's nothing about Western civilization that makes us better at math than the Indians or the Chinese. Nothing whatsoever. Okay, a kid here and a kid there and a kid there. If they learn math, they learn math. Period. Okay, right? There's no racial reason. There's no cultural reason. There's no historical reason. So the thing is that when the kids in India and Bangladesh and China start coding, and they are coding, right? The coding work is going to go over there, and that's going to be, so we're never going to compete. It's not because we're not smart enough. It's because it's not cost beneficial, because, they can churn out kids who can produce algorithms and code the material and compile the data. And it's not economically viable for us to do this. So the thing is that if our manufacturing is leaving, if low paying jobs are leaving, if the sort of more mechanical of the so-called white collar jobs are going to be leaving, what is the essence that is going to make the West competitive beyond the obvious things like We have access to fish, and we have access to oil, and we have access to various natural resources and other things, but we don't have a unique access to these things. And also with multilateral conglomerates and all that other things, those barriers are breaking down. So if our society is going to continue to advance and mature, and our people are going to, and we're going to be ahead in all the big things, artificial intelligence, cognitive sciences, in manufacturing, in services, what's the essence of that? Well, the essence of that is all of it is going to come out of the humanities. All of it. Why? Because we have our concepts and history of pluralism have given us the greatest archives, the greatest libraries, the greatest inquiries, the greatest investigations into the human experience and the plurality of human experiences around the world. So I'm sorry to all you post-colonial theorists out there, but we actually have to return to that material. Because not to say that colonialism was good, but here's the thing. All the people who are right now doing autoethnography and are complaining about post-colonial theory and everything, in other words, they're studying themselves and they're doing nothing. We have archives that have been built up by people who spent 5 years living among other people in the world. Was it for the spread of Christianity? Sometimes. Was it for the spread of empire? Sometimes. But sometimes it was genuinely an extension of the West's curiosity about literally everything. Literally everything, about the natural world, about botany, about anthropology was just, there are also humans. There are bugs and there are bees and apparently there are zebras and platypuses, whatever the hell they are.
Platypi?
You know, wherever the heck they are. There are things that they couldn't even believe. They couldn't even believe that there were things like that out there. All those fascinating creatures, you know, in Australia and Africa and whatever, and, you know, South America and places that were far away, And that meant also other people, other ways of thinking, other languages, other things. And all of that, this isn't only through the colonial experience. It was part of the Enlightenment project. The fact that it coincided with the colonial experience is a connected but unrelated. Sorry, it's a related but truly separate phenomenon. In other words, they went out there to learn what they wanted to learn because they wanted to learn it because the advancement of human knowledge and the creation of the grand encyclopedia and the belief that knowledge was cumulative and was empirical and was falsifiable and was real and was worthy of knowing simply because it was worth knowing has fed us in a way that it hasn't. So while everybody gets bent out of shape about Oriental studies, like Oriental, you know, we've all read our what's his name from Columbia University, Palestinian guy who's dead now. He wrote Orientalism. It'll come back to me. Anyway, he was a scholar of literature. It'll come back to me in a minute. But anyway, probably too late. He's a good scholar, and it was important, and the contributions. But the thing is, there were no departments of Occidental studies in the Eastern societies, and that mattered. Which means that we have this giant wealth of material from which to draw and from which to understand and look outward, which feeds innovation, which feeds creativity, which feeds inspiration, which feeds things that Shanghai doesn't have. Shanghai, they don't have it. They don't have it. They don't have the history of it. They don't have the culture of it. They don't have the questions. They're not wondering. These are not the questions on their mind. And while they're going to code the hell out of us and flatten us, which is not a verb, but whatever. But we're not going to be able to compete because of labor unions, because of things like democracy and human rights and other things that we care about that they don't. The future of all the areas that are going to be on the front edge of creativity and innovation are going to come out of our humanities backgrounds. And I think our kids need to become immersed in an understanding of how the world is, about how different cultures are, about who we were and who we can be, and start to study acts of meaning and comparative acts of meaning. And that is going to open up a universe that big data hasn't even touched yet, because the thing is it's one thing to collect a bunch of stuff. It's like Seinfeld and reservations. Anybody can take a reservation and hold a reservation, right?
Yeah.
So the thing, collect all the data you want, but you have to understand the data, and they don't understand the data.
Yeah.
And the source of that is so these kids who are going to come out with literature degrees and English degrees and art degrees, I think that if they get good educations, as opposed to some of the crap that's being taught, but if they do it right, they're going to be the champions who are going to be able to take all the things that are banal to the next level, because everybody's going to compete with us on the banal. So the question is, what's going to take us to the next level? And the answer is who we have been and who we hopefully we will continue to be.
Yeah.
But I don't know if they're going to shut down all the damn departments.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a real problem. I think you were meaning Edward Said.
Edward Said, that's who I was talking about.
That's the guy. That's the guy we're looking for.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I agree. And again, you mentioned the comment about the kind of education that a student might be getting at the universities. And I guess, I mean, it is a shame, but you see universities under attack all the time, and they have been attacked for several years now. And I mean, at least over here, I don't know what it's like in the States as much as I do here in the UK, but it is now a customer-driven business.
Yes, that's right.
The students are the customers. If they don't want to do the work, then they don't have to do the work. If they don't want to come to class, they don't have to come to class. If they don't want to learn, they don't have to learn. But you better goddamn give me that degree, because I paid you money for it. Yeah. That's essentially where we're at.
They didn't. But that's a mistake that young people are making. They didn't pay for the degree. They paid for an opportunity to learn.
Yes.
And if you avail yourself of that opportunity, it will result in a degree. And if you don't, then you can go sell shoes.
Yes. And it's disappointing, because the powers that be that run the universities now, because they literally view it as a customer experience, they don't want a bad review. So therefore they are catering. I wish I was making it up.
Ridiculous.
I wish I was making it up.
It's ridiculous.
It is. But they are now literally catering to the students. If the student gives you a bad review, it is the teacher's fault. It is the university's fault. It's not the lazy student who drank too much the night before and didn't want to come to class and didn't turn in their essay or didn't come for their final exam. It's the university's fault for not making it fun enough. Which is bullshit.
I would love to see that in the military. I'd love to see like the Navy SEALs getting things like. Did you enjoy your instructor? Did you give him?
Wouldn't that be
preparing you for war?
Right. Right. Now the other thing that it'd be fun to get your opinion on this last bit here before we close up is within the creative writing branch of academia. It is funny, because it's interesting that you're talking about how in terms of humanities, where it's all about going out and trying to learn and understand just for the sake of knowledge in a lot of cases, right? A lot of time, I think that same thing can be applied to writing. There are many people who are writing stories and trying to immerse themselves in a world, in a group of people, in a mindset for the sake of understanding and learning and trying to convey a message, I think.
Sure.
Now, what is fascinating to me is there are many academics, lecturers within the establishment of universities who are wanting to sort of box people in. It's like that episode of Friends when Phoebe is dating the shrink, and he gets really pissed off because everyone's like coming to him for advice, and he goes off on one being like, oh my god, you all just want to be defined, you want to be in a box, and it's funny because now we have, in our 21st century world, we have become so fucking boxed in with everything that it is very difficult. And what's so tragic is I was at an event a couple of weeks ago, maybe about a month ago, where I was speaking to a girl who was studying creative writing on an MA level, and she was really frustrated because her supervisor was kind of forcing upon her the idea that because she is from Pakistan, she needs to write about being from Pakistan. She needs to write about the Pakistan experience. But really what she wanted to do was write a 1940s crime novel set in the UK, set in London. Murders happening on the tube. That's what she wanted to do. But she's being forced, and this is something that I've seen in my experience with through my MA and in my PhD, this sort of, you should be writing about this because you are X, which
God.
feels so limited.
It doesn't feel, it's okay. That's okay. It's tragic. It's tragic. It's tragic that she was told that, because first of all,
yeah.
Was she actually from Pakistan, or is she British?
Yes. No, she was. She's from here. She's visiting. She's not visiting. She's literally come from Pakistan to here to study and do this MA.
Okay, so she's Pakistani. That's not her heritage. She is Pakistani.
Yes,
okay. All right. First of all, it's so interesting that she even wants to write that. That the idea that you would crush that is horrifying to me as somebody who simply loves creative acts.
Yes.
I mean, the fact that she grew up in whatever, Lahore or something, and is like, yeah, but God, the tube in the 1940s, that's nuts. We got to get in. That's so interesting. It's so inherently interesting.
Yes.
It's like this. It's like there was this black girl in America. I mean, an American girl, and she's like 18 years old or something like that, and she just became enraptured by river dance stuff, by this kind of dance. I don't know her background, but it was a thing, and and suddenly, and she was really, really good at it. Not that I'm an aficionado, but you can, she was clearly superb at it, and this is a teenage girl, mind you, who has already mastered something that she's already better than any of the people who are complaining are ever going to be good at. I mean, they're never going to be good at parallel parking as she is at this already. And they're giving her hell talking about cultural appropriation and all this other kind of thing. And I wanted to say to them, not to her, because there's a great result to that story as far as I know the end of it. But what I wanted to say to them was, what you're looking at, is that cultural appropriation or is it love? Because clearly, first of all, 18-year-old girls in America don't appropriate anything. There is no there. She is under no power to so it's a nonsense concept. Yeah. But the point is, she was inspired. She was inspired. She loved it. She went for it. She did it. And it turned out the people at Riverdance actually saw it, and they invited her onto the troupe. Now, COVID came along, and I don't know what the backstory, but it was freaking awesome. It's a great story, and and I want to find out how it played out. And I hope to God, that she's on there, because the thing is, it's like, recently there was a Japanese production of Fiddler on the Roof, right? And you put a bunch of Japanese, and they're all speaking Japanese with a Yiddish accent, and they're dressed up like it's Fiddler on the Roof. Is it cultural appropriation? No, it's love. It's respect.
Yes.
It's wanting to bring a musical that somebody over there, I don't know who the director was, but said, look, I swear to God, audiences here are going to love this in Tokyo. And he was right. It was great. So the thing is, inspiration, love, openness, connection, these things are where it should be. If a girl from Lahore suddenly loves British crime fiction and wants to write something knock yourself out. My response would be, do your homework, get your facts right. Make sure you know where the tube runs. Make sure you know the things. If you have any questions, come to me. I'll show you where the archives are, and let's go for the authenticity you're looking for. Do you want to go for realism, or are you going to go for something else? Talk me through what your vision is. Not sure? Great. Let's play with it. Let's write a chapter and in different ways, like hyper realism, and then also a bit magical, and see where it goes. See which one inspires you. That's what I would have said as her teacher.
Yes.
So the answer is wrong teachers, wrong agendas, wrong curriculum.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
I completely agree. I think that is one of the biggest problems that I think is kind of marring higher education at the moment, is
small-mindedness.
Yes, you have you. It's ironic, I suppose, because you have that level, that type of small-mindedness, but then you also have the reaction of, which is university is, I suppose, I don't know if it's predominantly left. There's a lot of left wingness there.
Sure.
And I'm way more liberal than I come from, originally from Indiana. It's a very right wing state. I'm very much I don't fit in there anymore. But the problem is you then see people on the right who look at these extreme reactions, and it's like it can't work anymore.
Yeah, but the problem is that it's not really a progressive left anymore. It's a regressive left, because what they've done is they have taken on certain theories about power and how power works, which, by the way, are often wrong. And they've applied them to human relationships in a very flat manner. And what I mean by that is that they use the same analytical lens for a range of different social phenomena and constantly impose an interpretive framework on it, which leads to only one result. Yeah. And so what that means then is, or the consequence of that, not what it means, but the consequence of that is that people who are risk averse are constantly afraid of stepping into conversations that go up against a kind of ideological orthodoxy. And they're not actually doing what we should be doing, which is free thinking, opening up. Now, keep in mind, she can, and I in some ways, I don't know who the Pakistani woman is, so I don't want to talk about a real case, but if somebody from, again, whatever, Peru wants to write about, what about I don't know, a kibbutz or something like that, it could fail. In other words, it could be a bad book. It could be a bad movie. It could it could not work. But that's the nature of the beast, right? It's not, if you have, I have some song on my rotation while I'm working out. And I wish I could remember the name of the band, but it's a woman hard rock band. And the song is about how they're just constantly being told that, that like women can't play guitar. Like it's biologically impossible. Right. And at one point she says, and at one point the line is something like, I apologize for trying. And it's a real zinger. It's a really great line, and that's the thing. It's like, we cannot be apologizing for trying. We can fail, and we are allowed to be judged on the quality of what we produce. That girl might produce a great book. She might produce a piece of junk, but that's not really the issue. The issue is, give it a go. And if it's done with love and it's done with a certain measure of respect and an understanding, you can go unbelievably far. And the last thing I want to say on this is, Uncle Tom's Cabin was written by a white woman in Maine, and yet about a Black experience in America that she never had, and really only to some extent understood. And and many things are historically wrong, and many things might be offensive, and many things, whatever, but it also helped change the entire mentality of a nation before the American Civil War. It mattered. When John Steinbeck wrote a very small book called The Moon is Down, which he did in cooperation with the OSS, which is the forerunner to the CIA. It was written as a deliberate tool of propaganda for Europe. And it was about a small northern European country, Norway, being occupied by the Nazis, and making the argument that the spirit of democracy that is imbued in these people from their culture and their history, even though they are suffering now under the black boot of the German occupation, would eventually win out. And and I read that. I lived in Norway for a decade. I'm married to a Norwegian woman. I know Norway. I've written 2 novels about Norway. I got this place down, at least to a certain extent, certainly more than most Americans do. And when you read it, you're like, you don't really understand Norway. or at least you don't understand large aspects of it. But here's the thing: after World War II, and I can end on this as we approach 2 hours, is the King of Norway in 1946 bestowed on Steinbeck a medal for contributions to the war resistance, for what he did, because it so uplifted the nation that it helped a people survive. It helped them be seen. It helped them be noticed. It helped them be heard. It helped them. It proved to them that people on another part of the world who they thought, the Norwegians thought the Americans didn't even see them. They suddenly felt seen and cared for. And so they looked past the error. They looked past the failures. They looked past the obvious cultural errors, and they saw the love. They saw the motivation. They saw the humanity. They saw the caring that went into that. And because he's a good writer, and because he could empathize to a point with the resources available to him, but on the things that mattered most for the moment that they were in. So my point is that no, you can't just write about anything and think it's going to work. If you don't have the resources for it, it's going to fail, right? I mean, I don't expect a Norwegian filmmaker who doesn't know anything about the Jewish American experience and necessarily be able to direct Norwegian by Night unless they get a little bit of help from, right? Ideally me. But that doesn't mean that he shouldn't be given a shot, he, she, it, whatever it is. Because that's not the issue. The issue is the human being, the actual person, not the cultural baggage that they're coming from. Some people are just magicians. They have an unbelievable reservoir to be able to absorb and reach out. Other people don't. Other people come from a culture and they have nothing whatsoever to say about it. Whatsoever. Nothing, because that's how it works. We are not all created equal, and that's it. And we need to find ways of encouraging each other to create, and we need to be a little forgiving when the acts of creation fail, if they come from a good place. If there's cynical money grabs to misrepresent another people, then take them out at the knees. But that's not usually. Then that's not usually what's happening, though.
No,
it's just not.
Yeah. Sorry, I got like a thing in my throat, and I don't know why, but I agree.
It's all the emotion. It's all the emotion.
It's all the emotion. Something's making me cough.
It's because I'm getting myself worked up about my.
Right.
Anyway, I'd like to see art survive.
Yeah.
I'd like to see Western civilization flourish. I would like to see
I
some of
love
these
it,
ideas go forward. And I'm sure that talking about it on your show is going to be what does it. That's what I'm saying.
Of course, this is saving humanity right here.
That's right, right here.
I agree. I fully expect that art will carry on. I don't think it's going to die. I think we very well might experience a quite dramatic and severe lull of academic art. Art within academia. But I think there's, because in the current age that we're in now, there's so many interesting outlets for people to write stories, tell stories, whether that's through the written word or through music or through film. There's so many more bits of technology that make that so much easier for individuals. 10 years ago, to self-publish a book was very complicated. I could throw something out tomorrow if I wanted to, with little effort, and it would.
I know, and GarageBand and these sorts of things make it possible for that. It's possible with music now. It's possible with with various movie things. That's right.
Yeah,
we can distribute in a different way now.
Yeah. So despite the cynical title of this episode, the death of heroes in story, I don't actually think that that these things are going to die. I think what is potentially happening at the moment is it's a combination of things, but one of the potential factors is that I think there are certain, similar to this academic, this instructor who told the girl to write about her Pakistani experience.
Yeah.
I think there are certain the death is coming from the boxes. The death is coming from saying you need to write about this, you need to write about that, and then I think, in addition to that, other potential causes of this hypothetical death is coming from potentially not understanding certain things, or intentionally trying to. If we go back to Star Wars reference again, we don't know what's going in the minds of these particular creatives. We don't know. We do know that Mark Hamill said directly to Rian Johnson, "You fundamentally don't understand my character," which I think is quite funny. And he basically said, "Well, this is what I want to do," and Mark Hamill had to suck it up. And you can see in most interviews, Mark Hamill is not happy. So I think, I that's kind of why I like to use that particular example is I, that these kind of things are what is making both the kind of the Hollywood storytelling and the academic storytelling shaky. That ground is becoming very shaky because of these kind of things.
I listen, my position at the moment, or my observation, which I'm prepared to say out loud, which is a slightly different way of looking at it, is that the far right is burning books and the far left is preventing them from being written at all. That is my situation. That is what, and when I say books, I mean anything. And I also believe that the health of a society can very largely be measured on whether or not it creates and maintains an enabling environment for the creation of art.
Yes. Yeah.
And I use the word art broadly. I don't care if it's choreography. I don't care if it's, whatever. But I mean, the whole kit and caboodle. If you are in a society that feels a desire to create and is an environment where creation is possible, it isn't being limited, it isn't being directed, it isn't being, and it is ideally being supported.
Yes.
As nuts as that might sound, but throughout history, by the way, art was actually supported because it was considered important, as opposed to being something that, was supposed to make money. You're supposed to survive on your own. And at the moment, that is shrinking.
Yeah.
I mean, the indication is not good, even though the resources, the access to resources is expanding, but the political environment is the problem, because you have to speak into a universe that allows those thoughts to be spoken and potentially to resonate. Yeah. So that's and that's where we are. And it would be nice to fix that. And this is partly why I'm happy to come on shows like yours and and use, even if it's a soapbox standing on the corner of whatever that was, a thing in Britain or in London where you stand on the box and Speaker's Corner or something.
Speaker's Corner. Hyde Park.
So, even if there's nobody there, at least it gets it off my chest. And so,
exactly.
And I'm happy to do it. I get to meet Phil. I get to see you. You got the best background going there.
Thank you.
So that's nice.
It took a while to curate, but I'm happy.
It's a beautiful thing. It's too small, so I can't zoom in on the details. But
I know.
But I can tell right away that you have a very understanding wife. So that's fantastic.
I do. This is true. I'm lucky. But I agree. And I think in the future, I think art will continue. I think there's always punks. There's always punk rock. There's always going to be some sort of punk rock response to the suppression and oppression of creativity. And eventually, if what is happening now becomes too much, you'll get that pushback. You'll get that.
What I'm hoping though is that in order for things like that to work, there needs to be an audience for it. And sometimes audiences need to be built, and sometimes audiences are there waiting to be served. And my hope is that we haven't crushed our audiences yet, and that we still have people out there who are hungry for, as it were, the real thing.
Yes.
Who aren't interested in all of this ideological, heavy-weighted, ham-fisted, top-down, imposed. Because the other thing is that ideology is never as nuanced as the human experience, and ultimately, individual drama is always going to shine through because we focus on the particular.
Yeah.
But we have to be allowed to. And the thing is that, and so, I feel like my job as a writer is two parts. Number one is to do the work. And number two is to make sure that there's space for the work to be done. And so if I have to speak up and I have to yell at people, the other thing is that they're very going to be, to be a little arrogant about it. I've got some qualifications. I mean, you come at me from the left, it's like, well, I worked for the United Nations for a decade. What exactly have you done?
Right.
And if they come at me from the right, I have a master's in national security and I worked in security policy. So again, what have you got on me?
Right.
So and then I'm a political scientist who's an artist. So it's like, I don't know,
yeah.
Good luck. Good luck. But
I love that. It's true. It's true.
But I'm not afraid. There's not a fight I'm afraid to get into these days. So if you're looking for somebody,
yes.
Because I think the stuff matters. That's it.
No, I agree. I agree.
All right, guys, it's been a pleasure.
Yes, this has been a lot of fun.
Absolutely.
I've thoroughly enjoyed this. I would just real quickly show you. Phil was doing some sketches while we were.
Yeah, this is like the most random thing that I drew. The history of the show, I think.
Is this what are we looking at here, Phil?
Exactly.
How does this relate to anything we were talking about?
Exactly. There's one thing that it does, and that is
the juggling ducks.
The duck juggling. Yeah.
I like it. I mean,
Thank you.
There's stuff. No,
You're good.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I like it.
I draw something every time, and this one just happened to be the weirdest one so far.
That's great. That means that you felt open to go, which is
that's right.
That's the best compliment of all. So,
Indeed.
all right.
Thank you.
Cool. All right. Thanks for being here tonight, Derek.
Thank you.
It's my pleasure.
We've got links to your books in the description, so people can jump on that if they want to go and purchase one of your many books that you have out there. Is there anything you want to promote before we jump off here?
Peace, love, and understanding.
There we go. I like it. I like it. That's good. We'll be back next Wednesday. We are chatting with an indie rock band called Lena and the Lions. We're doing their top six records and films. So that's 3 records, 3 films. That's their top 6. It's going to be a heck of a lot of fun. So I'm looking forward to doing that. But we'll see you Wednesday to do that. So we're signing off. Goodbye, chat. Goodbye, world.